Alright, so today's lesson is a little bit different than normal. We are going over our quiz, so we are going to go through some problems and talk about how we are going to grade your free response test tomorrow. Okay, so if you want to look back at these for reference, this would be a great idea to help you study for the test. So, first off, first problem that I went over with you guys in class is number 12 from your quiz that looked like this. Okay, so I'm thinking strategy. Remember, we always want to think what's the best way to proceed. I know that this probably would have something to do with difference of squares, right? Because I see two terms and a minus sign. So I'm thinking difference of squares, but I know the first thing I really need to check for is a GCF. And if you look at the numbers here, you'll see that we have a GCF of 2 here. So I'm going to factor that out. Factoring the 2 from 50b squared, I get 25b squared. Factoring out the 2 from negative 8, I get negative 4. Okay, now I can look in the parentheses and I see that I do have a difference of squares there. Before I move on to that, though, I should point out that factoring this correctly on your test, factoring out the GCF, will give you that 1 point. Okay, and again, I'm looking inside the parentheses now, and I see that this is a difference of squares. Okay, so I see that 25b squared is a perfect square, 4 is a perfect square, there's subtraction between them. So I'm going to move forward with the steps for factoring a difference of squares, which was last Friday's lesson, so that would be, I believe, the 29th. So go ahead and look at that. Oh, no, 29th was, sorry, the 26th. The lesson from the 26th was difference of squares. So look back at that if you are getting stuck on this problem. But I'll go through it quickly here. So 25b squared, I'm looking for, what's the square root of that? Well, there's 2, it's 5 times 5, and then b times b, so that's just 5b, right? One of each of them gets out. And then square root of 4, that's just 2. So now I write them in the parentheses. I have 2 sets of parentheses. I have 5b plus 2, then 5b minus 2, right? So I put the first term first, then the square root of the second term goes at the end, and then one's a positive, one's a negative. Okay, so doing that then, correctly giving these factors would give you 2 more points, so 1 for each of the factors that are in a set of parentheses. Okay, so that gives you a total of 3 points on this problem. Okay, so 1 for factoring the GCF, and then 2, 1 for each of these, so this is 1 point, and this is 1 point. Okay. Alright, moving on then to number 9. This problem required you to use Xbox, but there was no GCF, so we can just start with Xbox right away. This is the expression, and I want to label my A, B, and C. Okay, so I start by creating the Xbox. I put A on either side where it goes. AC is going to go at the top, which is 45 times 5, so I'll do a side problem because I can take that time, right? That's fine to do on your test. So I'm going to do a side problem of 45 times 5. I get 225. And then B goes at the bottom, so I have 34 there. Okay. Next thing I want to do, I guess I should mention first, setting up the Xbox correctly here gives you 1 point. Okay, so that's the first point of a problem like this. Okay, now I'm looking for factors of 225. I know I have these. I want them to both be positive also because I want them to add to 34. I know I could start with 1 times 225, right? That's obviously not going to be it. 2, I can't divide 225 by 2 because it's odd. So I moved on to 3, and I'm doing a little scratch problem to divide 225 divided by 3. That gives me 75, so I have 3 times 75. Again, same thing with 4. Since 225 is odd, it's not going to be divisible by 4. So I'm going to try 5, which I know this is divisible by, and it is 5 times 45, which I actually did earlier. That was my A and C, right? So those are obviously factors of 225. Okay, and then I'm going to look at 6 is not going to be a factor for the even reason again, right? So 6 is even, 225 is not even, so it's not going to be divisible by 6. 7, I know that's not divisible. It ends up giving me a fractional answer. Into 8, again with the even thing, right? I can't divide 225 by an even number. So I'll move on to 9, see if I get another factor out of 9. If I divide this, I get 25. Okay, and then finally, if I keep going up that way, I know I can't do 10 because it's even. 11 as a special pattern that I don't see here, so it's not 11. 12 is even. 13, I could try, I suppose, but I think I already see my answer. I ended up just writing another one here, which is 15, because I know that 15 times 15 is 225. It's one of the perfect squares, right? 15 would be the square root. So I see that 9 and 25, though, those add to 34. So I'm going to put those under the A terms. And identifying those correctly will give me my next point on this problem. Okay, and then next thing I want to do is look to see if I can simplify either of these fractions. 5 over 25, I can simplify that to 1 over 5. So this is 5x plus 9. Oh, I should, simplifying the fraction here gives me 1 point as well, if I simplify them correctly. And then my final answer, which would be 5x plus 9 times x plus 1, gives me, x plus 5. So 5x plus 9 times x plus 5 will give me my final answer, and having that correct answer gives me my last point. Okay, so that problem is out of 4 points then. Okay, so pause here if you want to write this down to have in your notes to look back at. Again, these are just a couple examples of how we would score these for tomorrow. Okay, so make sure that you're showing the appropriate steps. Okay? Alright, moving on. The next problem I did was number 13. Oh, sorry. Number 13. This is a problem that we would want to factor by grouping because there are 4 terms. Okay, and there is no GCF, so we would start with grouping right away. This is the original problem that was on your quiz. So I'm looking at the factors of these numbers. I chose 4 and 5 as my factors for 20, just because there was already a 4 and a 5 in the equation. So I figured that that would be a good place to start for my factors. I saw that negative 20x squared and negative 5 both have a 5 in common. So I'll end up grouping those eventually. And then the first and third term, the third term is just x, so it technically has a coefficient of 1. So we can think of that really just as 1 times 1. And then they have the x. So that's what I'm going to use for those 2 terms. So now I'm going to regroup these according to the common factors that I have here. So I'll go in descending order as well. So I'll start with 4x cubed and go from there. So if I have 4x cubed, I know I want to group that with x. And then the next lowest exponent, or the next highest exponent, is negative 20x squared. And I know I want to group that with negative 5. Okay, the next thing I do is factor out the factors that I had identified. So 4x cubed and x, they don't have a coefficient in common, but they have a variable. So this is just x times 4x squared plus 1. And the second part is, I could factor out a 5, but I'm going to choose to factor out a negative 5 since they are both negative. Doing that will leave me with 4x squared plus 1 in the parentheses. Okay, and now that I've done that, I see that both terms have 4x squared plus 1, so I can pull that out in front. And when I factor that out, in the first term I'm left with just an x, and in the second term I'm left with a negative 5. I look at these now to see if I can factor any more. The first one looks close to a difference of squares, but it's addition, so it's not. So that looks like my final answer then. I'll go ahead and give you the point breakdown now. So up top, if you identify the factors that you're going to be using, then that will give you a point. So circling them or rewriting the equation appropriately, something like that, gets you the first point. The second and third points come from correctly factoring each of these groups. Okay, so you get 1 point for each part. And then finally, your correct answer at the end will give you 1 point, so you have 4 points total on this problem. Alright. Okay, the next thing we did was practice doing some free response in class. So I had you guys work on factoring this problem all the way through, showing all your work on your own. And then we switched and peer graded, going off of the point system that I talked about earlier in the lesson. So for this problem, if you weren't in class or didn't get a chance to do it, I would pause here and take the time to try this problem out and then grade yourself. Okay, so going through this, the first thing you want to notice is that there is no GCF, and so you would jump straight into an X box because it's in the form A times something squared plus B times that something plus C. So my A, B, and C are these numbers. Next thing I want to do is set up my X box. I know that I put A on either side, and then B goes below, and the number up top is A times C, so that's going to be 18. Okay, now I'm looking at my factors of 18. Oh, and if you did this correctly, this setup, that would get you your first point. Okay, looking at factors of 18 now that add to 9. I want them both to be positive then. These are the factors that I know of, so I'm going to stop there because I have 6 times 3, which is exactly what I need to add up to 9. So I'll put these under my A terms. Identifying the factors in some way will give you another point. So if I boxed it like I did here, that's a point. Or if you just put them below, that's fine too, as long as you have the right one. So if you identify those correctly, that will give you your next point. Sorry about that. Okay. This was 3. Okay, so then the next thing you would do is look at the fractions. So I have 2 over 6 and 2 over 3. If I can simplify one of those, or both of them I should, I see that I can simplify this to 1 over 3. Doing that correctly gives me another point. So just simplifying the fractions correctly will give me that point. And then rewriting this as n plus 3 times 2n plus 3 gives me my final point. Alright, and then same thing here. We did a practice free response, so I'm just going to go ahead and show the answer that we got. This is how you would break it up. This would be factoring by grouping, and they don't all have one common factor, so I just start by grouping right away. There's no GCF to pull out. Okay, so I rearranged my terms. I put the ones with a 7 in common at the end, and then the ones with a 5 in common in the front. That's very clear judging by what I have written, so that would be a point. Next I'm going to factor out what I said I can factor out plus any variables. So that gives me 5x times 5x squared plus 4 minus 7 times 5x squared plus 4. Doing both of those correctly would give me 1 point each, so 2 points total for that line. I could have grouped these differently in case you're doing this at home. If you group the 4s and the 5s